Welcome to America's Lost Cities. In our country today, we have over 19,000 cities. At one time or another, most of these cities enjoyed prosperous economic times when businesses were thriving, families were growing, populations were increasing. Well, somewhere along the line, many of these cities have been forgotten about, lost in the sauce, tossed to the wayside. People were forced to leave their homes to make room for urban renewal. So many beautiful homes and buildings became mere shells to be leveled and torn down. And in their place were built low-income housing projects, which still stand today. So many lawyers and bankers and contractors, city officials lined their pockets at this point in time, not just in this city, but cities all across the country. But here's a story of one such city. This is the true story of Newburgh, New York.
When I came here in July of 2006, I was actually on a spiritual retreat for myself and really didn't know anything about Newburgh, never heard about the place in my life. And I was up in the Catskills at a retreat. And then on the way, last day of that, my son called and said, "Mom, I want you to come and see this old house I bought in the city of Newburgh, and it's on exit 17. And so I did, and I went into this old house on Grand Street, and bones were it was just absolutely fantastic. A beautiful staircase. And because I also have a background in construction, I ran a construction company for about 5 years in Oregon.
Wow.
I looked at this old house and I looked at what they were doing to it and literally said, "Stop, whoever's doing whatever they're doing here, they have no idea what they're doing. They're going to wreck this beautiful old house." And so that's what led to my son saying, "Well, but then you come and fix it." And me designing the renovations and kind of working as the general contractor for the next year to renovate this old house. Suffice it to say that some things happened in Boise, Idaho, which is where I lived at the time. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that all those ties were cut in 6 weeks. Wow. And I was back here in September 6, 2006, and worked on the old house until the next summer. And I had thought I would sell it and go back to Boise, and that was the end of Newburgh and done. And what I say is Divine Spirit had a different idea for me.
My name is Animal Hughes. I, like my parents before me, were born in the city of Newburgh, as well as my sister and other many members of my immediate family. My mother's people came here from Shaka, Sicily in 1901 and established residences in Mulberry Street, south of Houston in Manhattan, and moved up to the Hudson Valley in 1905 when the first child was born. The Hudson Valley in this region was where the Revolutionary War was conspired, financed, and managed by George Washington from the Hasbrook House in the city of Newburgh, overlooking the Hudson River. In the days of the square riggers, the ships could not turn into the wind and fight the tides or the winds, so they had to anchor and wait for the tide and the wind to be favorable to snake around the S-turn at West Point, and thus Trophy Point was a battery where cannons were placed, and when the British came up to what is known as the World's End at the beginning of the S-turn, they would lower them in the water a few feet by blowing holes in the side of the shells and sinking them in place. On the other part of the protection for Washington being in the city of Newburgh, the Scunnamunk Mountain Range and the lands south provided impassable mountains and cliffs and lots of rattlesnakes to guard George Washington in the summertime. And those same lands in the wintertime were impassable by horse. So Newburgh wasn't just picked out of the sky, it was a strategic location point to conduct the business of the Revolutionary War and provide a maximum amount of natural protection for Mr. Washington and his endeavors. The war was financed here, it was conspired here, and it was carried out here over a long period of time.
I'm standing in front of Thomas Edison's original laboratory here in Newburgh, New York. The first street that Thomas Edison lit up was Pearl Street in New York City. Newburgh has the distinction of being one of the first municipalities to be powered by Thomas Edison. In the laboratory, everything is exactly the way Mr. Edison left it.
Newburgh was a wonderful city to grow up in. It had all the different recreation programs you wanted. You could walk from one end of town to the other end of town. People said hello to you during your travels, and it was a clean city, very clean.
Back when I was growing up, like we had the stores down on Water Street. There was, schoolmakers. We used to go in there and play with the trains and what have you. A lot of good Woolworths, Five and Dime store.
Yeah.
A lot of good places back then.
We had a really big mix of people, didn't we? Irish,
Oh, yes.
Italian, Jews,
Oh,
Polish,
yes.
right?
We all were together.
Everybody got along.
Yes, we all got along with one another.
Yeah, that's great.
And we helped one another.
It was beautiful. We could walk from Renwick Street. We would go to Liberty Street. We would walk downtown, and the street was like a mini New York City, if you will. I mean, beautiful. People would sit out in the front of their homes, and people would actually go visit. Neighbors would go visit with each other and sit on their porches and talk, and it was so delightful. It was a beautiful city, and there was nothing to be afraid of.
It was an absolutely beautiful place to grow up. People were friendly. People showed great concern for one another of every color. We had no problems back in those days. We would ride the bus from our home downtown and shop and go to the movies and walk to high-Y dances at the YMCA on Friday nights. Things were good. It was a great place to grow up. It was clean. It was wholesome. It was safe, and most of all, I think it was what we called home. There were many, many things about Newburgh that made all of the residents very proud. The Delano Hitch Recreation Park, the baseball fields, softball fields. Newburgh had a lot to offer.
Back then, you could leave a $100 bill on the kitchen table, go on vacation, let's say for a year, come back and still be there.
Right.
Now, it wouldn't be there a minute.
No, you're right. You're right. So, but you're still here.
Yep.
And you're not going to leave.
Nope.
I was born on Ann Street, 291 Ann Street. That is where my grandfather had a store. That store serviced all of Ann Street. It was next to Sacred Heart Church, the old Sacred Heart Church. And up on the other corner was Mr. Gerassi's store. Now, Mr. Gerassi, my grandfather, and Mr. Rizzio lived very, very well together, and they all had a piece of the action all up and down Ann Street and Mill Street.
My father came to Newburgh with a friend of his who Mr. Stroock wanted to hire as a superintendent. His name was Walt Qualman. And after going through the plant, he asked my father a lot of questions about the carding and spinning end. And since my father was pretty much an expert on that, he answered and gave him all those answers. It wound up that Mr. Qualman never took the job, but Mr. Stroock wanted my father to come up and be yarn superintendent, which my father refused right off the bat, since we lived in Philadelphia, all our relatives were there, the grandmothers and all, and he said, I can't take my family away from there.
Right.
So Mr. Stroock made him an offer that he couldn't refuse. He offered him that large house on the hill, 14 rooms, Prospect Hill, 3.5 acres of land for some, I think it might have been like $90 a month at that time.
Wow.
So that's what talked him into coming. Stroock employed, when my father first came to Newburgh, about 500 people. It was right after the war. And Stroock would, anybody who was discharged from the Army or Navy or whatever, would always have a job when they came back to Stroock. A lot of them, they just put a paintbrush in their hand and let them paint or do whatever just to keep them busy, until the older people kind of weaned their way off and moved out and retired or whatever.
Hudson River, Newburgh, back in the 1960s, nobody really liked it. Nobody wanted to be down there.
No.
It was consolidated, where they would take all the trash and everything. And you are the guy that took a building that used to be a slaughterhouse, if I'm not mistaken, back in the turn of the last century.
Right, and then a dock building service.
Okay, and what was it before you got it?
A dock building service. My cousin Pete that got killed in Vietnam, we used to go down there and we used to crab. And I said to him, I said, this make a good restaurant and bar. I said, look at this, the majestic Hudson. Look at the mountains over there, Mount Beacon. We got the best scenery here. So when I hit 40 some years old, I took a shot at it, and I had to go through the council and all the rigmarole. Some of them were against it, some of them were for it. Finally, we got it passed, and it was very successful. I had people from all over Connecticut, all over the state, and even as far as Jersey. You could come by boat or come by land. I mean, it was a home run because of Newburgh was so great back then.
Technically, I was born in Saugerties, New York, but moved to Newburgh when I was 2 months old. My father had a shop up in Saugerties, and he lost in the Depression, so the family moved to Newburgh at that time.
What kind of shop did he have up there?
He had an ice cream parlor, ice cream soda parlor, like the Commodore and those kind of places.
And the Depression kind of
wiped him out.
Wow.
And so that was in 1935.
Okay. And your father's store, the one he opened in Newburgh, what did you guys specialize in?
Homemade candies, primarily.
Okay.
And we had a little ice cream. We didn't have a regular soda fountain.
Okay.
Take-out ice cream, but mostly candy.
Right.
They called it Fanny's. Fanny's homemade candy.
Fanny's homemade candy. That's a very clever name.
My mother's name, in Greek, they transformed it into Fanny.
I understand. Okay, to Americanize it.
Right.
I hear people say, I was born and raised here, and then there are people here that have moved here, maybe in 10 years or whatever, but there's something else going on here, whether you were born here or you come here, that's very infectious about Newburgh. And it's a spirit of people that are passionate about this city. I mean, I've never been in a city where people are so passionate about their city.
This is called the Old Town Cemetery. Some of the people here, the dates go back to the early 1700s. In the Old Town Cemetery, we've got some people that streets were named after. Carpenter Avenue, Lander Street, Du Bois Street, and Fowler Avenue. It's a shame that this cemetery is not a little bit better maintained. As you can see, it is in disrepair. This is part of the problem, and this is what you find throughout the entire country. I know we're not alone.
There's so many things about Newburgh. I was out with last night with a very dear friend of mine, Jan Ericetti, and we were reminiscing about Newburgh, knowing I was going to do this interview. And we talked about the good old days, Broadway, Water Street. Oh, it was beautiful.
Yep.
And the ferry boat coming in. It was just a beautiful city, and it still is a beautiful city.
Well, I've been here for a very long time, and I drive around Newburgh constantly, and I've heard that comments from many people, good old Newburgh and what it was like. And I wish it was the old days, and I wish we had the assets that we had in the past. I see it completely differently. I drive around, when I think back of what we did in Newburgh, the assets that we lived on, and I see them still here.
There were railroad services from the mid-1800s on both sides of the river, both passenger and freight and commercial. There were steamships that made the journey from New York City to Albany 4 times a day, 30 miles an hour on a regular basis, 300 footers. This was one of the largest manufacturing regions in the world at that time. Everywhere where there was water power, the water power was tapped. And the manual labor of human manufacturing was at its highest peak in the Industrial Revolution times as well. So we've had a history of huge opportunities and advantages because of the river, the canals, the original railroad and subways and everything that have been going on forever. Transportation, as always, is a key issue.
Many different trains would stop here, bringing visitors from New York City to come to Newburgh to see the beautiful river and to take the trolley cars up west to Orange Lake. Orange Lake was a huge amusement park, so people would come from the city for a weekend on a Friday and stay until Sunday. Most of them did make it to Orange Lake, although there were a few places you could stop along the way. One was a halfway house, which was actually a tavern. And from what I'm told, many visitors would stop at the tavern for a beer or two and never made it to the Orange Lake fairgrounds because they were a little inebriated. And that was their weekend. They would hop back on the train and go back into the city. So Newburgh has always been a tourist destination. Today, we need to revisit that. And I think that's an industry that can help redevelop this city and breathe life into this city.
Oh, I came to Newburgh as a kid. My parents used to take me to Beaver Dam Lake for vacation a week or so every summer. I loved it. It was the first time I ever fished in a lake, and we had the rowboats, we swam there, and then even had a riding stable alongside of it. We did horseback riding.
Wow.
Look forward to it every year. So that was the first time. And then my mother used to like to go into Newburgh and do some shopping.
Really? So she went down around Colden Street?
Down on the waterfront, they had a big shopping area.
Oh, do you remember the shops that were down there?
No.
No.
I was a kid. I hated to go with her, but there was a whole row of stores and streets.
I believe it was in 1953, America dubbed the Queen City of Newburgh as the All-American City.
Right.
And then shortly thereafter, there was a deep dive slide that started that I believe hasn't stopped yet.
Inner city problems occurred. Crime increased at a rate probably greater than in most other local cities or adjoining cities.
Mm-hmm.
We saw people moving from the city to locate in the adjoining towns, and in some of those cases their homes were not saleable, and the tax rolls then became an issue when our pocketbook factories closed up, when our woolen mill closed up, when Stouffer's closed, we found that they couldn't face the competition from other countries and whatever. All those jobs went, and people then picked up and moved to where they could find good work.
Right. I know now, right now, today, as we sit here, there are over 700 vacant buildings in Newburgh. I also know that there's about 34% of property owners that are paying taxes in the city of Newburgh.
That's incredible. It's a very, very sad situation.
It's very sad.
Logically, the city cannot survive in a situation like this without the income that's needed. There, right forth, we can see the problems with the condition of the streets, the snow removal problems in the winter, problems keeping good firemen and policemen on the job. We're loaded with inner city problems that have come over a long period of time.
If you take a tour of Newburgh, say Broadway and a few other streets, they're dilapidated. Boarded up buildings, you know, things are just, they're not the same. They're not the same.
Behind me is one of the original spans that would allow the trains to cross over and allow our people to get underneath and through the river. One of the few things that have actually survived all these years, over 100 years, survived urban renewal. And this is what it's become, a haven for homeless people. As you can see, it kind of looks like a loft apartment with no loft and no apartment. And as we walk down this beautiful walkway that is littered with garbage, less than 50 feet away are some of the finest restaurants in Newburgh.
When I drive there now, of course, I'm very inspired and very happy about the work that's been done to develop the riverfront in Newburgh with more boating facilities and with some wonderful restaurants and entertainment spots. That's fantastic. As for the rest of the city, my heart goes out.
During my course of my tenure working for the city, I've worked for maybe 37 city managers. I don't know how many were interim, maybe 20 full-time and the rest were interim. But of that total, only one really cared about the people in the city of Newburgh.
Our politicians they're just in there for what they can grab.
Yeah.
They're not in there to rebuild the city or do anything to make the economy better in Newburgh.
Urban renewal ruined the old part of the city.
Right.
There was money to be made. There was people with sticky fingers that got out there. One town of one city official. I'm not going to get into that.
No, that
they condemned the houses and tore them down and moved the people and just destroyed a good part of historical Newburgh.
That urban renewal should have never come here. If it came here, it should put back what it tore down.
That's right.
But it didn't do it. This is why people had to buy these great big homes, couldn't afford it, and have them fixed so that they could get rent and to have the people live in these homes.
Right.
But the city fathers, go ahead and do this.
And now, who did that? Who was running the city back then?
Well, I don't want to say.
What happened here back in the 70s is a criminal. It's a criminal offense.
Yep.
And I come to really understand, and I'd like other people to understand when they talk about Newburgh, the people in this city literally watched a crane, a heavy equipment, march down their whole city center that was on the riverfront, and building by building by building, their home, their grandma's home, their business,
destroyed them.
Watched them destroy it. They literally ripped the heart out of this city and never completed the transplant. They had a right to be angry, really angry, and they were. They were. And some still are, and they passed it on to their children. But now it's time for the healing.
Right.
It's time to let go. It's time to come together. And more I see people looking at that in terms of how to come together and start joining with each other in partnership and collaboration, public-private partnerships across the reigns with churches, across the aisle from parties. It's time to bring about the true legacy of the city of Newburgh.
You have so many different architecture styles and so many different architecture authors, and they're very recognizable, their signature style. You can see it in the building.
Behind me we have a beautiful rendering of Downing Park. That's our beautiful park in the city of Newburgh. The park was designed by Andrew Jackson Downing, who's an architect that was instrumental in designing Central Park.
Andrew Jackson Downing was the mentor of Vaux and Olmsted and was considered to be the father of architecture for landscape architects. He was their mentor, and they were the designers of both Central Park and Downing Park in the city of Newburgh, the sistership, and many parks throughout the country. He was a native son. Andrew Jackson Downing was born here.
So Newburgh's Downing Park is a miniature Central Park. And Andrew Jackson Downing made Newburgh his home until his tragic death on the Hudson River when he was attempting to save people from a burning boat. His estate still stands in Newburgh. You can see it today.
A lot of great architects that lived in Newburgh, that built those homes down here and designed those homes.
Right.
And a lot of those are destroyed. I mean, the granite has been taken out. A lot of the fancy woodwork and what have you.
Yep, the mantles and all that.
And all
yeah.
removed.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
It is.
And a lot of those tore down too. I remember my aunt and my uncle. They lived down there, overlooking the river, in little houses that were stacked on top of each other, and they tore all of those down.
I know. Urban renewal, right?
Yeah. You know, the shame about it is that, you know, there's a lot of great architects that lived in Newburgh, that built those homes down there and designed those homes.
Right.
And a lot of those are destroyed. I mean, the granite has been taken out. A lot of the fancy woodwork and what have you.
Yep, the mantles and all that.
And all removed.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
It is.
And a lot of those tore down.
The stock of the buildings that was there, and for the most part, they were in reasonable enough shape where they weren't too far gone or weren't beyond repair. And as it went on, chandeliers, stained glass, pocket doors, mahogany entrances, French doors, fireplace mantles, parquet floors, everything that was worth big money came out of those buildings before the buildings were knocked down, and even the bricks were sold.
This neighborhood used to be a thriving neighborhood with brick row houses for up and down the block. We as kids, we played together, lived together really, went to school together, Montgomery Street School, which was a neighborhood school, which no longer really exists, neighborhood schools.
Right.
And our families all grew together. Within a 5-block radius, we would have banks, stores, department stores, food and grocery stores. We had a playground, a firehouse, everything a neighborhood community should have. But one day, along came the Urban Renewal Project. I never forget, When I was young, my father told me to sit down and listen as they made the proposal to him. So I listened and I heard that they were planning to rebuild this area with new housing and make it affordable for people to live here.
How old were you then?
I was maybe 12, 14 years old in that neighborhood. And they made an offer to my mother and father for the house. And they also told him that if they didn't accept the offer, that they had the option of acquiring the house through eminent domain.
There were a couple of dozen people involved. There was banks that were involved. There were lawyers that were involved. There were contractors that were involved. And it appeared as though that they had a money machine envisioned in order to get the people out. And it appeared as though that they forced the people out first that they knew couldn't afford to fight them, and then went on their way once the steam got rolling.
He accepted the offer, and we moved from here to Chamber Street. We were one of the first families to move. I'll never forget them saying that there were a lot of problems here, and they wanted to correct them and make it a better place to live. But we as kids, we didn't see any problems. Everyone was happy. Everyone was doing what they had to do.
But there was never really a plan in place what to replace with.
They had no permitting. They had no financing. They had no blessings. I mean, HUD was unheard of as far as participating. In fact, during the Joan Shapiro administration, in her first year, myself, Joan, and others went to Washington, D.C. and met with Ron Lorenz, who was the first black HUD agent in the United States. We went there and met with them, and they laid it all out to us on what we needed to do and how to get there, and showed us all the ropes and all the bells and whistles necessary to do it. And no one ever followed up on it. Land was given away, money was made by people, lots were given up to certain individuals for $1 a piece, and they turned around and sold them for millions.
Where I'm standing, there used to be beautiful buildings, shops, retail shops, butchers, made their way all the way down here to the river. They were all leveled for urban renewal back in the late 50s and early 60s. However, urban renewal never happened. So after leveling all these buildings, this is what we have left. Vacant land that's doing nothing for no one. Here we have low-income housing. Very nice buildings, but they replace beautiful, beautiful Victorian homes that line these streets. Again, part of urban renewal. Right now we're riding through the town of Newburgh, right past the line of the city of Newburgh. Now the town has utilized this riverfront property the right way. But I think the biggest reason is the corruption isn't like it is in the city of Newburgh. For so many years, over 100 years, people in the city have figured out ways to put money in their pocket rather than utilizing the beautiful riverfront for the general public's use. They pretty much utilize the riverfront for personal use, personal gain. And now we're seeing that in the news all over. Politicians that have lined their pockets for years, bribes, giving contracts to big contractors. And I think that's kind of what happened during urban renewal. And some of these homes have been here for a very long time, and some are fairly new. But this is the right way to utilize your riverfront, not what we've done in the city of Newburgh to make it low-income housing. And the reason for the low-income housing, I'm sure, is because at the time, these contractors, these politicians knew it was guaranteed money from the government. There was no such thing as, we're not going to get our rent this month. And that's what really prompted that to happen. And it happened, and it still happens. It'd be interesting to see who's on the receiving end. And it'll also be interesting to see who controlled the city of Newburgh then and who controls it now. IBM, International Business Machines, wanted to come to Newburgh in the late 50s. And the people that ran the city of Newburgh did not want that to happen. They didn't allow them to come into Newburgh. So as a result, IBM moved all of its operations to Fishkill and Poughkeepsie. And Fishkill and Poughkeepsie, which is across the river, became very, very economically sound because of IBM. Thousands and thousands of jobs, which meant thousands of dollars in tax revenue that we could have had here in Newburgh, but that wasn't allowed. I'd like to know, and so would a lot of other people like to know, who stopped that from happening? Let me ask you a question, Ben.
Yes.
I know in the late 50s, IBM wanted to come to Newburgh, and I was told General Electric wanted to come.
Yes.
I also was told Ford before they went to Mahwah.
Right.
And our first installment of these documentaries,
Right.
I spoke to several people, and I asked who stopped that from happening. It was amazing. People in their 90s are afraid to talk about it.
Right. Well,
You
I'll
know-
talk about it. I'm not afraid to talk about anything. Okay. It was the council. The council voted against IBM because they wanted a few things. They chased DuPont out of here. DuPont wanted a break on their water. Okay, they had 1,800 people working from
That's
the
right.
Newburgh area.
Yes.
And they said, they threatened the council that they would move down to South Carolina. And when they wouldn't give them the water, they moved.
Yeah.
1,500 people, 1,600 people lost their jobs. My father, my uncle, they fought it. I mean, they argued with people, and they chased DuPont out. They wouldn't let IBM in.
General Electric.
General Electric wanted to come in and build a plant here. They would have put, then there would have been progress here. A lot of people would have been working.
I'm very saddened when I look at the condition of our buildings and the fact that we have no real thriving businesses to contribute to the overall economic health of
Right.
Newburgh. So yes, I'm saddened by the condition of the streets. I'm saddened by the fact that many of our residents are very afraid to drive on side streets and places where we used to walk fearlessly
Right.
and never have a question of a problem.
Right.
And those things are very, very difficult to swallow when you're born and raised here and
Right.
have come up through the years here.
As a businesswoman that has traveled all over this country, actually consulting with other large firms in best practices in business, I looked at this city and I said, man, this city's got so many assets. Why aren't they developed? You know, it's got a river front, it's got an international airport, this huge wide street here, wonderful old factories, the second largest historic district in the state of New York. Why isn't there a huge tourist industry here?
Right, you're
Why?
right. You're right.
Why aren't there businesses in these old factories? River cities all up and down coasts all over the country have revitalized. What is holding this city back?
It's a shame. Newburgh had a lot of history.
Yeah.
And a lot of famous people
Yes.
came here, from here.
You were friends with Mickey Spillane, right?
That's right.
Tell us about that.
Well, when I was a kid in high school, I worked in a golf gas station, which was on Broadway, Upper Broadway, about where Freak Electric is right now. And he used to come in, Mickey would come in with his car to get gas. And really nice guy. And then, of course, he brought Jack Stang with him. They were together a lot. They were doing this movie thing that he did with the
Mike Hammer.
Mike Hammer movie.
Right.
And those guys are really interesting, to me as a kid, 18, 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
And what the interesting thing is that I graduated, of course, at 18 years old, and he offered to give me his car to go to the prom with his new,
Wow.
I think he just got it too, And I wouldn't take it. I mean, I was scared to death, I didn't want the responsibility. I figured I'd wreck it or something.
Yeah.
So, but he forced it. He even left the keys there Sid Pollock at the time, a really nice guy. Him and his wife were the owners of that gas station at the time. And a Polish guy, a really nice guy, and his wife was a sweetheart. I think his wife's name was Kathy. I don't know how I remember it. This is back in 1951, I guess.
Wow.
So anyway, he left the keys to the car there, but I still didn't take it, you know.
And Mickey Spillane worked in the Schoonmaker's warehouse. And he was fascinated with Jack's looks because Jack was big and rugged and Mickey was small. And they got to be friends. And then Mickey got the idea for this, for Mike Hammer, from looking at Jack. Jack was his idea of the detective.
So he got the idea of Mike Hammer just by Mr. Stang, because
By
Mr.
his-
Stang was kind of like almost a Clint Eastwood kind of a guy, right?
Yeah.
Wow. So what happened? So Mr. Stang used to tend bar?
Well, not all the time, just once in a while. Then he went on to the police force. He was a motorcycle policeman on the police force.
So how did Mickey Spillane get your husband into acting?
Well, he started writing books about Mike Hammer with Jack in mind because that was Mike Hammer as far as he was concerned. And then I guess when he got an offer, his books were very popular years ago. Then when he got an offer to make movies, he got a hold of Jack, and Jack was on the police force at that time. And that's how it started.
And what was the first film that Mr.
Well,
Stang
he
appeared
made Ring of Fear. Well, he made one movie, but he didn't have a very big part in that. And the second movie was Ring of Fear. And they were impressed with his looks and everything out in Hollywood, but they didn't give him the lead in the Mike Hammer movies because they wanted someone that was well known. John Wayne owned a company called Bat Jack.
Didn't know that.
He made that movie Ring of Fear.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So he got to know John Wayne a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. See, I never knew that. And I remember, used to cut your grass and stuff. I just never messed around because Mr. Stang was a rough guy. Let me ask you a question. Do you remember Big Nell?
Oh, do I? Yes, in my younger days. Everyone did.
You know who Big Nell was, right?
Yeah.
Any stories, anecdotes?
Well, when I came up, the whole thing broke. I said that I never heard of it before, and I never thought there was an open bordello down that everybody knew about. It's a small little town, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
You went to one of those places in New York City, very hard to find. The cab driver wouldn't tell you about it unless you knew somebody that knew the cab driver.
Nice lady, but they ran her out of business too. But it was a time when Newburgh had all kind of stuff going on like that.
When I was a single man, my friends and I, we would frequent the local bars. And at 3 in the morning, the Orange County alcohol beverage law required the bars to close. And we found out that Big Nell was serving alcoholic beverages.
After hours.
After hours.
Right.
There. So we would frequent her place, and we would go in there and have a beer. And I always remember that I would buy a beer from Big Nell. She had a little bar set up, and it would only cost me $1.
Wow.
$1. And she would have music on, and she would have some girls there, and, we danced
Chat.
with the girls, and, it was a nice evening. And then we would wind up there about 4 or 5 in the morning, wind up going to a local diner for breakfast there, and, had a great evening there, and that was the end of our evening.
She was the most popular woman in town. And I heard stories about there was a rite of passage for the high school graduates to go to Big Nell's.
That's right.
We all knew Big Nell as a wonderful lady. She did so much for the community, for many charitable organizations. I couldn't say enough about Big Nell, God rest her soul there.
When I was growing up, I couldn't wait to see the parade because they were up and down Broadway, all down through Washington Street, down through Colin Park or Colin Street. And Colin Street at Christmas time, Water Street was the greatest city in the world because it was just like being in New York City.
On Easter Sunday, when they had Easter parades, we would go up and down Broadway, and then we would go to the Poly, look at the flowers in Downing Park, and then from there we'd go down, have little cocktails at the Crystal Room at the Palatine Hotel. It was beautiful, and they ripped it down, and they made a library in the area.
Yes,
It was the most beautiful building in Newburgh.
A gorgeous hotel overlooked the Hudson River. People came from far and near to have a room or be a guest. That sounds better than a room. Be a guest at the Palatine Hotel.
Palatine Hotel was one of the buildings that was demolished during the attempt to do something downtown.
What is that you're holding up?
This is the front face of a children's menu from the Palatine Hotel. You can see the loop around the outside of the ear of the clown where you can put it on as a mask.
That's probably circa 1950?
This, I'm going to say 40s or 50s or maybe even back to the 30s. If you'll read these prices on the back, it may tell you a better idea of when that happened. But the Palatine Hotel was an unbelievable building that was on the corner across the street from the courthouse, which is now known as the Heritage Center, the old 1941 courthouse. In 1971, they redid the courthouse in the city of Newburgh, and I worked for an electrical contractor that was on the project. And I might say they really destroyed a beautiful building with the renovation. It was a shame what they did. They took the bell out of the tower, I really don't want to get into that. I get upset when I think about further things that they did to destroy the architecture of the city of Newburgh.
In the 1930s, my dad managed to save a couple bucks up and take us to the country for a week vacation. And we stumbled upon the Meadowbrook Lodge, and we were the very, very first customers ever to patronize the place. Anyhow, from that point, it's all history, and we go back to the 30s. In 1941, we bought the place. We bought the whole Meadowbrook, not the way you see it today, but with 200 acres of land. We bought it for $32,000 in 1941. Of course, that was like $3 million.
Sure.
And, well, anyhow, that was 1941. 1942, we went to service. The war broke out, of course, and my mom and dad continued to run it. When we got out of service in 45, we came back to the old homestead, and my brother and I, John, and we just worked real hard. It was tough. It was a tough, long haul. But we managed to prevail, and we built up a nice little resort business. And at that point, in 1950, is when this fella came to me. He was the manager of this singer, Joe Barry. And Joe Barry was now known, very popular as Tony Bennett. Of course, he sang for us for a whole summer. And later on, after the summer was over, he and I went on a national television show with a live audience. And, well, he sang Boulevard of Broken Dreams. He was Joe Barry then. He wasn't Tony Bennett.
What show was that?
That was the Robert Q. Lewis show. It was like an interview. I was the talent seeker, and they were talent because they didn't know we knew each other.
Oh, I got you, right.
So it was quite an experience. Anyhow, And of course, the rest of Tony Bennett is history.
Back when I was a kid, we used to go down, walk all the way down through Colden Street, beautiful stores and everything was decorated. Let's go down to Schoolmakers and see Santa Claus. My mother would take us down there.
Yeah.
And they ripped all this stuff down for urban renewal, but they never rebuilt anything.
Yeah, yeah.
They just,
and what was
they just destroyed the city.
They destroyed, and no one did anything about it, though.
That's right. Nobody did anything about it.
Why?
I don't know. It seemed like the politicians just took over. They created the welfare, and from that day on, the city went downhill. You can't run a city on welfare because they're not paying taxes.
Right.
You have to build up the city, get the taxpayer back on the tax roll.
It turned out, as I recall, that there was a city in North Carolina directly pointing the patients from that city to Newburgh because they were going to sign you up free right away.
That's correct. That's exactly right. There were billboards, from my understanding.
And
Newburgh.
it was a one-way street. There was a general traffic coming straight from that one town. Clifton, South Carolina, I think.
What was the name of that?
Clifton?
Clifton. And then we've got generation after generation.
Yeah, and that started a whole chain
of
decay, really. It really did.
So let's look at the two big users, or two of the biggest users. Mount St. Mary's College doesn't pay any taxes. They own a chunk of property the size of 12 city blocks and probably a couple of $1 billion worth of assessed value. I don't even know if they pay a pilot. If the city's councils and the lawyers and the people that have their fingers on the comptroller's office especially, and the legal department, pushed and exercised their legal right of remuneration for services rendered, the police, the fire, the DPW, the parking agencies, snow plowing, everything in the world gets consumed by, not just by Mount St. Mary's.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the hospital, that's a big drinker of services, no taxes.
Right. So we're really paying the bill for all that.
We're picking up the bill for a couple of not-for-profit agencies, one of them flying the flag of wholly tax-exempt, and the other one a not-for-profit agency that's barely making things together but yet pays their CEO over $750,000 a year. How do you do that?
We are to blame for a lot of this because we could all have gotten together and tried to help one another so that Newburgh could be the way it used to be.
That's right. You're right.
But that was not done. And so consequently, who had to suffer?
The people that still live here.
That's right.
Do you think Newburgh will ever return to its former glory?
Every time I go back up there to visit with my daughter, I do see that it is trying to come back. And I don't know that it'll ever look like it did in the 50s and 60s, but I think if we get more people to try hard to fix it up and clean it up, yes, I really do believe it will come back.
Do you think Newburgh will ever come back to its former glory?
No.
Would take a miracle.
I doubt it very much.
Well, you know, I think you got to think positive, and you got to know that it was a great city, and it would really be nice to get it back on the map again, you know, and to be positive about it.
It's a tough question to answer, Mark. Unless I had a crystal ball, I couldn't answer that.
Hang in there. Work to make it come back.
Perhaps not in my lifetime, but yes, I do believe that Newburgh will once become what they call the Queen City of the Hudson.
Right.
And that's my greatest hope.
I don't know. I worked 36 years for the city of Newburgh, in the recreation and youth services. And one of my goals was to work with the kids to try to give them a positive environment so they could develop into productive adults.
Right.
Hoping that that would be the force that'll turn the city around. There are some groups that are helping out, getting things going. But one group that I'm involved with is the Newburgh Unity Armory Center.
This is a very unique center where we welcome every member of the community, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, and provide them a safe, secure environment where we provide each individual that walks through our doors with respect, treat them with dignity, and offer them opportunities to learn and grow. And the hope is every one of the fine young people that steps through our doors will end up having a successful career, whether they go to college or go right into the workforce. And what we do is we try to even the playing field for all. So we really don't care what your economic background is, what your racial background is. We want to provide equal opportunity to all. And what's happened at our Unity Center is everyone comes through, realizes that we're all valued individuals and that none of us is better than any other.
So the Saturday morning enrichment program is like the key or the prize mission of the Newburgh Armory to provide academic enrichment opportunities to the children and families of Newburgh. And we do that by providing over 19 class offerings to which range for kids from kindergarten to about 6th grade. We have dancing, acting, graphic design, computer programming, guitar, you name it, and we likely have a class that's affiliated with that.
I would like to welcome all of our new ballet dancers this year. I'm Jasmine. I'll be helping you get through the dance routines we'll be using at the Metropolitan Ballet this year. I expect to see each and every one of you, 8 a.m. sharp, every morning with your ballet shoes on, ready to work. I will not tolerate tardiness or laziness. If you want to be a great ballet dancer, you must work very hard every day. If you work hard and do everything I tell you to do, you can be a great ballet dancer. Good luck, and I will see you tomorrow.
Let's hear it!
Great job. So since I've been here, it really has been growing, but definitely right now we're at 450 kids enrolled. The whole Saturday morning program is, I'd say, a genuine liberal arts education, and right now our most popular is our literacy based classes. I would say we have a reading class called Dare to be a Wild Reader. We have an iPad class that we use the iPads to have literacy experiences, and we also have a nursing program that even the nursing class, you think nursing is good enough, but they're actually reading books. So we are proud that our literacy classes are the most popular right now.
You know, this might be the first place many of our children, both elementary, high school, and even the college kids, feel a sense of belonging, a need, a love, camaraderie. And it's really changing how they view the community they live in. It's really quite remarkable to watch. What started as a recreational facility has now turned into, first and foremost, an educational facility where we provide a variety of classes and opportunities. So the hope is we find what a child's passion is, early on and allow them to pursue it.
When you really talk to the people here, and that's most of the people that have this wonderful heart for the city, that are doing what they should be doing. Yes, we have our issues and everybody in the news knows about it, but that's not the essence of the city of Newburgh.
Correct.
It's not the essence. That's an issue, and that's an issue that's important, and we have to solve it. But by focusing on what's great about this city and what all these assets are, that's why this city is turning and moving in a new direction.
Yes.
So it's why I'm so passionate. It's why I took this office. I never wanted to be a politician, never even thought about being a politician in my life. But right now, I am so passionate about doing something that is right by this city, because so many have done so wrong by it for so long.
Right.
It is time for a new destiny.
It's a city that was meant to be for everyone here in Newburgh. The schools, the stores, and we must work together. But this is a new generation.
I know.
A new generation, and we're just hoping and praying that they will keep going on and learning and getting from us what we did, and would like to see it continue. And I am certainly still blessed and happy that I'm a part of this beautiful city.